Ahojte moji milí štvrtáci, ja vítam vás na dnešnej hodine. Teda dnešná hodina je asi taká, že ja mám ešte piatok, nejako som vás odučil a využívam trošku času, aby som si nahral hodiny dopredu. Vaše úlohy z minulého týždňa ste, hádam, teda všetci pochopili, k čomu smerovali, a to, aby ste mi v podstate vedeli veľmi jednoducho citovať zdroje. Musím vás ešte raz nejako vyzvať, poprosiť, aby ste to naozaj spravili poctivo. Je to v podstate veľmi jednoduchá záležitosť, pretože stačí vám tam dať veľkými písmenami priezviska autorov alebo konkrétne nejaký kanál, z ktorého čerpáte. Benjamin napríklad tu vôbec neupravil to YouTube, aj keď som ho na to vyzval. Capital znamená capital letters, čiže veľké písmena. Ak sa dá, tak samozrejme použijete italics, čiže kurzívu, aby ste napísali nápis, aj mne sa tuto napríklad nedalo, musí tam byť dátum a link ešte ide, takže toto sú veci, ktoré inak popravde ovládajú aj druháci, aj tretiaci bez akýkoľvek už problémov. Vám asi naozaj nepomohlo to, že sme vás nedonútili písať tie projektové práce minulý rok. Dobre, každopádne my pôjdeme ďalej, uvidíme, ešte neviem, akú otázku som vám zadal. Dôležitá vec je však tá, že ja som sa minulú hodinu strašne zakecal a nenadarmo ma tam už drhlo, že naznačalo, že už skončí, takže vidíte, že o chvíľku už môžeme natiahnuť ďalšie video pre druhákov. No, my pôjdeme ďalej a pokúsim sa veľmi rýchlo, ak sa to samozrejme bude dať. Čiže tie 3-4 slajdy, čo sme si prešli minule, doplnil som ešte možno obrázky k Berlin Crisis, dvom berlínskym krízam, The Berlin Blockade, či ten letecký most, a musel sa do toho Kennedyho s tým Berlinérom, so šiškou, a The Berlin Wall na meste Berlíne. Takže today we'll continue with the Cold War, so that should be the lesson 2 about the Cold War II, and even 3, I don't know, but at least that would be very long topic, and actually I will repeat many of the proxy wars, many of the hot conflicts, or some other forms of the Cold War. So for that reason, I just picked up some of the events for this timeline, so you can just compare them with Slovak notes. Don't forget that there are also Slovak notes. I should definitely show it because we can compare them. Actually, I had some Facebook debate about absolutism. And this is the thing, Sveta Európa po druhej svetovej vojne. So for example, we have some events about for example, uprising in Hungary or Korean War, and I mentioned, for example, I don't know, Cuban Crisis with a couple of words or a couple of photos, that's all, because all information are in Slovak notes, so you just read them. Berlin Crisis the same, apart from a couple of words, and so it's here, okay? Today I will explain you many of these things. We, for example, miss some of these pictures. Actually, I should have added them, but this is interesting that we have all the things we needed about uprising, revolution in Hungary, for example, the Prague Spring. Okay, not from our point of view, but from the point of view of the world history, including Helsinki Peace Conference. Okay, so just don't forget to read them too, and let's move on. Okay, from the critical events, crucial events of the Cold War, I picked up these. 1949, Soviets constructed A-bombs. That was completely different because by the time USA was invincible, undefeatable, like Superman, suddenly they have another superhero on the other side of the planet, with also dozens of thousands of missiles carrying A-bombs and later hydrogenium bombs. So this really created this kind of balance, of course danger for USA, but on the other hand for communists and communist countries it became kind of like safety, security for themselves, so they can defend and strike back. China will be given A-bombs much later, but they constructed it in 1950s, I believe, or something like that. China became communist at the end of their civil war, which was interrupted by Japanese invasions. and eventually communists prevailed. We learned about this with Mao Zedong, and China became communist, but like crazy communism. I shall explain this. Since the time, also in these national balls, you can see like China instead of Soviet Union aiming weapons and so on. The other thing was that in late 1940s, Yugoslavia with Josip Broz Tito kind of resisted to Stalinist regime and claims that Yugoslavia, as socialist country, a communist country, should also adopt many of the Soviet forms of their control. And these are among the things that I already explained to you, like with nationalization, collectivization, with labor camps, with oppression of political opposition and so on. Of course, Yugoslavia did many of these stuff, but generally they didn't, for example, start with collectivization. Nationalization was only of the big companies, and it was common thing that people like Croatians, Serbians, they had their own farms and private businesses with hotels, for example, and so on. If it was big, it was nationalized. For that reason, that the so-called Soviet Yugoslavian split, and Yugoslavia at the beginning of like big success of communism in this afterwar period immediately became like a bad guy, black sheep of socialist camp, and that's why they didn't never enter the Warsaw Pact. Anyway, they entered Comecon because still they needed any country, even poor country, that could produce something with surplus and export it to other communist or socialist countries. Still, Yugoslavia, to get to Yugoslavia for your grandparents or parents, it was pretty difficult. You had to have really, how to say, pure, clean list of your deeds, and if some political things were there in your family, so you just didn't get the permit to go to travel to Yugoslavia. And those who emigrated from Yugoslavia to Italy, because their borders were opened, so their families really suffered in Czechoslovakia and other communist countries too. Okay, another really big event was Korean War that almost turned up into Third World War. I don't know why people just underestimated. Later on, I realized that the reason was that Soviet Union at that time really didn't support the North Korean communists. They led it on China, and China didn't have A-bombs at the time. So this conflict couldn't turn into nuclear conflict, and it was just terrible big and 3 years long conflict with MASH that I should have added some picture to it. Still, it's just so on the two parts of the world that can fight each other anyway. In 1953, Joseph Stalin died. Legendary movie for me, The Death of Stalin. That is comedy, and I recommend it to you to watch it to understand how fearsome was it, and how this terror, which in Greek language it means fear, was present. It's no wonder in the 3 years after his death, Nikita Khrushchev, of course his descendant as the chairman of Communist Party of Soviet Union, revealed firstly at the beginning at the assembly of the 20th assembly of communists of the committee of Communist Party, and later on it was even published in Soviet and then in other countries' socialist media, where he revealed Stalin's terror, that everybody knew what was happening. But when this highly positioned politician claims that probably we are changing the atmosphere, we are changing the form and the nature of the ruling state, that it will be different. And really the effects were all around the Eastern Bloc, that here in Czechoslovakia, even communists who had been imprisoned by Rudolf Slansky were released, like Laco Novomeský, Gustav Husak. Many people were later revealed from prisons, and it was kind of big relief. But in Poland, and especially in Hungary, people took it like the end of socialism, and that's why in Hungary they start to bring revenge upon communist officers, bringing them to the streets and hanging them on the street lamps, which caused, of course, intervention to Hungary, what Hungarians call called Hungarian Revolution, but for Soviets it was their invasion to the country to save socialism and of course their rule. So they installed also their own like loyal communists, but they left Hungarian regime a bit more open to the West in the terms of economy and international trade. So if you wanted to buy some LP or jeans or leather jacket, you had to go to Hungary, for example, or to Yugoslavia, but it was much more difficult. But this uprising, this revolution was drawn in blood. Vietnam War is probably the eponymous symbol of the Cold War, especially for Americans, for the USA. Actually, Vietnamese had been fighting against French and against the Dutch in 19th century, then against Japanese, and again against French. In 1944, French army was finally defeated at the Battle of Dien Bien Phu, and they had to withdraw. But in Vietnam, Vietnam was divided in communist north and like democratic but nationalistic west. Which was not very successful persuading people that it is a good regime. So that's why Vietnam's regime started with partisan warfare, guerrilla warfare, in which most of the South Vietnamese people actually turned to communism, socialism. So it was much more open-minded. The leader Ho Chi Minh was, how to say, more Asian, like Buddhist socialism, so different one, and it will be especially important when comparing to Cambodia and Burma, for example, with really bloody regime. Uh, French didn't want to come back to Vietnam, so they asked USA to help, and according to Truman Doctrine, USA decided to enter there. That was decision of John Fitzgerald Kennedy, and that was actually his bad decision because he started war that later two presidents inherited and tried to finish because it was not evolving at all in a positive way for Americans. They were being defeated. Vietnam was supported widely by all Eastern Bloc. In Czechoslovakia, at schools, there were collections for the solidarity with Vietnam, with food, with medical care, but of course with weapons and so on. And Viet Cong, Vietnamese Communist Army, finally prevailed and defeated Americans, who withdrew, and they said we are just moving our armies back. Even in America, it completely changed and started with pacifism, with hippies movement, and big protests against war. Just watch movie Chicago Trial and you'll see also many things that how America, despite being democratic, still had big problems with racial prejudice, injustice, social injustice, or just watch musical Hair and you will probably understand it all. Okay, apart from Vietnam, USA intervened in plenty of wars. There will be another list of these things, so let's move on. Another symbol, even for us, was Cuban Crisis. Among the tasks you have for oral history, there is also this topic because you know why? If you have grandfather or some elders, neighbor, or somebody who was serving in these times, I mean serving in the military, like Mr. Poprats, so he wrote that how for these 2 weeks or 2 months, Czechoslovak People's Army and these guys, 18, 19 years old boys in military service, couldn't even change their clothes with loaded machine guns and automatic rifles, were prepared to march to be taken by airplanes dropped somewhere in Germany or France to fight in the third nuclear war because they expected that this Cuban crisis can actually turn out to be nuclear war in here. Actually, it ended up with agreement. I will come to that point. That in the way that Americans promised to Soviets that they would uninstall their missile launchers in Turkey, the member of NATO, leading to Soviet Union. And so Soviets uninstalled their launchers in Cuba, but Americans never promised it, and still in Turkey there are American basements heading on Russia. So when you see these maps comparing Russia surrounded by NATO, it's not actually very true because it's far away, and it's in Turkey, but actually borders with NATO are only small parts. I believe I added some of these pictures in here. Okay, but in Cuba, what happened? That communist regime survived, and even after the death of Fidel Castro, that even I expected some invasion of Americans. But good luck for Cuban communists is that at the time there was Barack Obama, and he was not very willing to invade some of these lands apart from Syria. That was completely different story with ISIS terrorists. And uh, actually, Raul Castro is still ruling there. So maybe Donald Trump, but Donald Trump, he actually didn't want to intervene in Syria. Like, let's America make first again, but again, bring it back to isolationism, like it was in interwar period. So that is interesting. And Cuba is still surviving and providing very bad example for economy for Bolivia or Venezuela and so on. Okay, what happened? 1960s were only these things with the kind of reforms and revolutionary and pacifistic feeling anywhere, and the kind of this beat generation, a big beat revolution with the Beatles and hippies brought also kind of spring atmosphere even to Czechoslovakia, where all these reform communist movement, the Prague Spring, was. Oppressed by invasion of 5 countries of the Warsaw Pact, in which Czechoslovakia was occupied since that time. Soviet army remained in Czechoslovakia with garrisons in Sliač, Levice, and so on. And Czechoslovak communists since then didn't have any chance to start up with reforms. If they could reform, it had to start in Soviet Union, and that happened later on with Mikhail Gorbachev. Because of Vietnam War and actually approximately 3 cerebral conflicts between Israel and Arabic states, and other many wars in Africa, persuaded the United Nations that they should probably organize big conference and try to introduce new document that would be internationally accepted about peace and protection of human and civic rights. And for that reason, in 1975, there was peace conference in Helsinki, Finland, held in which all countries of United Nations participated and they accepted on very actually vague but still nice words about protection of human rights of individuals, something that Britain had since the times of their glorious revolutions in the 17th century. And now this moment came to be because now suddenly there started movements in communist countries like in Poland, especially Catholic Church or independent labor union, because labor unions, odborové hnutia, in every communist country were under the control of Communist Party. But in Poland, they established their own labor union that was independent from the state, so they could go on strike and even fight and protest against communist government, which was unbelievable in the times of communism. And that started, and big motivation for them that Roman Catholic Church elected Karol Wojtyla, Archbishop of Krakow, to be the new Pope of Roman Catholic Church and Holy See, with the name John Paul II. Anyway, this first non-Italian and first Eastern European Pope became actually symbol of peaceful solutions because he was not criticizing communist regimes in those terms, but he tried to promote solidarity, helping the poor, just like Mother Teresa, for example, this Albanian nun in India, saving poor people, and it was actually very communist, socialistic things. Of course, for them it was just Jesus's work, helping the poor, accepting the prostitutes and these like scum of the society. For Poles, it was big support for the establishment of this labor union Solidarność, or Solidarity, in Poland under the rule, not under control, led by Lech Walesa, who became one of the symbols of the resistance against socialist regimes. The other thing that Soviets decided to, for the first time, because they pretended to be peaceful country and so on, so they decided to intervene in military way in Afghanistan. Afghanistan uh, experienced many invasions, and even Mongols were not able to conquer Afghanistan, not British Empire, nobody, and even Soviets were defeated. And 8 years in Afghanistan caused that Soviet economy was completely exhausted, wasted, and for that reason, already in early 1980s, new uh, chairmen of Communist Party Yuri Andropov and Andriy Chernenko had to solve big economical troubles in Soviet Union that also, of course, affected other countries. And these are moments that your grannies can remember that in 1970s, 1980s, it happened that there were no meat in the shops. There were long queues, even for like regular things that should not miss in communist country, like toilet paper or pads, period pads. And imagine this is really bad for me. If there is no toilet paper, I would take a machine gun and start to fight. So in this way, Soviet Union had to change. And when another chairman, and actually he was elected as the first and the last president of Soviet Union, was Mikhail Gorbachev. But even that he's appointing as the president will show that communists start to reform and looking for some other solution. They understood one thing. Even Vladimir Lenin, after the Civil War, after the war communism, had to have period of NEP, new economic policy, during which he allowed small businesses to be open to start up economy production, so people were motivated. Something that during Prague Spring, Czechoslovak communists wanted to have. And they start to call it perestroika. Perestroika, prestavba, rebuildment of economy into more open market oriented, something that China did too, and they survived. And today they are the factory of the world. Without this crisis, China would be superpowers. Then still they are. The second thing was to make people more happy, more safer, and more loyal to the regime. Was to relieve censorship. And censorship is something also they plan to be banned in during Prague Spring in Czechoslovakia, and they call it glasnost. Glasnost, when somebody is allowed, he's speaking, and nobody harms him for his or her opinions, then it's ban of censorship. You can meet together, organize demonstration, establish political party. Glasnost and perestroika are two words that symbolize big changes and reform in Soviet Union. And what was the paradox? In Czechoslovakia, our communists were afraid, still because there was Soviet army. They want to change anything. In 1987, even like radical Orthodox communists were elected to the committee of Communist Party. When in Soviet Union they were so open that people started wearing long hair and jeans. Weed, marijuana was widely bribed to Soviet Union and so on. So there's big opening, you know. But on the other hand, it causes also many people to feel insecure because open market bring capitalism, free market, bankrupts and fall of economy, unemployment, insecurity, crime, and many all these things. So also to understand how people were looking at this is very different. On the other hand, it gave hand this fall of socialism and communism in Eastern Bloc ended up with Velvet Revolution in Czechoslovakia, brings insecurity. At the same time, it allows nationalists to come back to scene. So that is really important. And when communists, Soviets, Russians refused to send their armies to Poland in 1988 so they organized free elections. Gradually, Hungary opened the borders, Yugoslavia too, but they started to fight each other, Albanians and Serbs, Serbs and Croatians, Bosniak, Serbs and Bosniak Croatians. It was terrible into like civil war in Yugoslavia. In some countries like Slovakia, Poland, Czechoslovakia, Poland, Hungary, they were free elections. Suddenly, democratic processes started. Also, economical liberalization of markets and so on, which was difficult but helping for many countries. We actually richer than during communism, despite somebody may tell you different things. But check the facts and probably since we have euro, the prices are actually similar. Not salaries, not yet, and this is something that your grandparents may see as a big difference in security when taking loans and how fast you can pay it off. Even Soviet Union didn't survive, and when Estonia, Latvia and Lithuania proclaimed they want to have independence in 1990, Soviets didn't do anything. Maybe I should add also the picture when there is big highway roads along these three Baltic lands, and people created human chain, holding hands in hands, like all these three countries together. So Soviets, Russians let them go, and very quickly Mikhail Gorbachev proclaimed that even other countries can separate. Kazakhstan, Turkmenistan, Uzbekistan, countries that could have stayed there with Soviet Union, within Soviet Union, but they didn't. Despite there are big Russian minorities, like in Ukraine, in Moldova, in Latvia, but sometimes too late after Boris Yeltsin in 1990s, Vladimir Putin started to, and until today they try to bring back this Russian position, but also their territorial expansion since the time when Baltic states or even Ukraine want to get, and they did, to European Union and to NATO. For them, it means for Russians they will never get access to Baltic Sea in these lands again. But this is another story, and you can decide whether you want to be under some Tsarist Russia, some I don't know, authoritarian regime with mafia, or having at least do we have chance to elect new president? Russians, they don't have this moment, because yesterday or 2 days ago, when I'm recording this video, Putin just signed up the law that he can candidate for the president twice more times. It's 10, 15 years more. So in this way, by 1991, there was the fall of Soviet Union that was replaced by Russian Federation, and of course they had very bad times in economy, which many people were happy that Vladimir Putin started to build Russia back on legs. And despite still big injustice and social inequality, they are happy to be like powerful, fearsome again. What happened was that in 1991, finally Germany was reunited, so reunification of Germany. Okay, what else? I believe that these were all these timeline of critical events. Let's have a look at some pictures or tasks that I have. This is obviously some meme about not meme actually, it's a fact about the Soviet Yugoslavian split, and that's a moment that Stalin tried to kill Yugoslavian leader Tito 22 times. Tito then wrote a letter in reply saying, "Stop sending people to kill me. If you don't stop sending killers, I'll send one to Moscow and I won't have to send a second one." Okay, so that is the relationship between two communist leaders. Okay, thanks to Tito, that Stalin died in 1953, and Tito lived until 1980, so he died only like uh, when I 1 year before I was born. And many people, what I heard in former Yugoslavia, even Croatians, so they really loved him because he was the only one who could keep these six nations and four religions actually together, and Yugoslavia was important big country. Okay, if we were at the lesson, or if we had the Microsoft Teams lesson, I would have asked you this question, these tasks. Right now, giving you bonus points, so just be sure you know this. So, what explained Eastern JFK? I believe you all know. John Fitzgerald Kennedy, that's for them. I told you that I will repeat and mention collectivization, that is taking the land and parcels, pozemkov, of the others into one collective farm. In Russian it's called kolkhoz, in Slovak družstvo, alebo rolnícke družstvo, zemědělské družstvo in Czech, and they should be like productive farms for socialism. As I told you, actually, only a couple of countries, communist countries, collectivization came up to like effective way of functioning, and that was East Germany, DDR, and Czechoslovakia. In Poland, people refused it. That's why there are big farms, family farms. And in Hungary, then actually that also had these big farms, but in Yugoslavia, they even refused to start it out because they knew that they would refuse. But this is one of these things. Monster trials. Those who attended seminar with Ms. Horniakova, so you had these monster trials in which communists try to depict any opposition leaders or even their own members from communist parties to be like a various fake accusing of committing crimes against state and public enemies, spying for imperialistic countries. And even Czechoslovakia is, in my opinion, mostly ridiculous. They accuse some Slovak communists of bourgeois nationalism. Nationalism. It meant that they want only that Slovaks should be equal to Czechs within Communist Party. They said, you're nationalists and bourgeois because you are writers and poets, and I know you have university. And for that reason, monster trials, communists, for example, in Czechoslovakia, they executed 200 people that, and actually another 200 communists themselves. Rudolf Slansky was the main, like, Lord executioner, so he was hanged at the end. One lady was executed. It was famous Milada Horáková from National Socialistic Party of Czechoslovakia. Those monster trials were actually also happening all around, and it depended on Stalin's decision. KGB, Komitet Государственной безопасности, it means the Committee of the State Security, and it was actually like secret agency of Soviet Union, still working with different name and various branches like GRU, which is contra spy agency, and Vladimir Putin was agent of KGB. That explains a lot, guys. If you didn't know that fact, it's really true. True fact. Vladimir Putin was KGB agent. Gulag. It's another abbreviation, which means I probably can't remember, but that should be about some governy, like lager, something like that. And that was like main control committee for labor camps. Nothing, no other word for that. Labor camps in Siberia. Here in Czechoslovakia, we had also similar tábory nucených prací, and of course, if you didn't want to kill somebody, some kulak, rich peasant, was against collectivization of his land, so he was sent to Gulag. Many of them died. Priests, nuns, monks, like Anton Serholec, for example. So they suffered a lot. Some of them survived, some of them didn't. So especially in Soviet Union, millions of people died in gulags. Kulak, it's different, not to confuse. Kulak was a Russian word for rich peasant. Usually, these men refused to enter collective farms, to enter kolkhozes, so that's why they were being persecuted, killed sometimes, or just sent to gulags in here. Josip Broz Tito, I told you about this guy. Actually, he behaved like some Oriental dictator. And there is one nice story that I cannot find the source of it, but my friend, he was doing his PhD from history about this topic. They'll tell a story that when Antoni Novotny, our chairman and president of Czechoslovakia, strict Orthodox communist, visited Yugoslavia as a part of these Cometcon meetings, and they were invited, like another part of the program, to visit at his personal palace somewhere in Croatia on the island, and it looked like antique Roman palace with fountains and gardens, and there were golden chandeliers, and there were half naked waitresses bringing some oysters and grapes, and there were tigers with the colors. And it was really like he was behaving this white uniform and black sunglasses like some African dictator, and like Roman emperor. And Anthony Novotny, he actually, they were so shocked that they stood up and they said bad words to Josip Broz Tito, some vulgar words that guys who these Czechoslovak communists survived concentration and Nazi camps and other imprisonment by their own comrades and fighting in partisan warfare. So they refuse that he's behaving like Roman emperor. Actually, Josip Broz Tito was legendary hero. He survived the same things, but he just used the times, and it was very different. Still, Yugoslavians loved him. Monster trials almost happened in USA. I recommend you to watch movie Good Night and Good Luck. It's black and white movie with George Clooney about a period that is called the Red Heat. Even when you watch Indiana Jones and this the fourth very bad part of it, it's happening in the times of Red Heat when America was so afraid of spreading of communism that they started to be paranoid, just like Stalin. And Joseph McCarthy, one of the senators, persuaded President Dwight Eisenhower to establish committee for investigating of non-American activities. Výbor pre vyšetrovanie neamerické činnosti. Even when you are surprised with this name, when someone tells you that I'm protislovenský živel, for example. It's anti-Russian. Probably it shows you that you do something that some leader, some politicians just don't like to hear. This red heat, this committee start to investigate people accusing of various crime, and they tried to search some connection to Soviet KGB or imperialism, some spies, and only according to origins of some people that he was Serbian or Croatian, so probably he was spy of these agencies. And even big celebrities started to be questioned, and when suddenly media start to be surprised, so people start to be scared, build bunkers in their gardens, and oppress any even like leftist opinions. So it was not very easy in this way to be like even Democrat in these times in USA, and people were really scared and paranoid about this. That's why they started to call this period the Red Heat. And what was different apart from Soviet Union, this period ended up, and this committee and Joseph McCarthy lost this power because free media in America started to investigate that, for example, Marilyn Monroe, famous actress, or Charlie Chaplin were questioned without any serious evidence about her. Actually, Charlie Chaplin was a big leftist, but I would call him anarcho-communist, anarchist mostly. But there was no any connection that they may help Soviet Union or something like that. So Charlie Chaplin rather under this pressure, he rather emigrated to Switzerland. So this is interesting, and actually they realized that free speech is very important because it can reveal these bad things happening in democracy. And yes, it's true that it was bad thing happening in here. CIA was opposition to KGB. You know it from American movies. Even more MI5, which is British intelligence surveillance. Mossad is probably the most effective, which is Israeli investigation agency. And for all its history, apart from fighting these Arabic or so communist agencies, it was hunting Nazi. Among them, Adolf Eichmann was captured, kidnapped, and brought to Israel from Uruguay or Argentina, I'm not sure, and he was accused and executed in Israel. So even Josef Mengele, who managed to escape, and many others, created actually things that probably they're hiding somewhere in Borneo or in Brazilian rainforest. Even Hitler may be hiding because they didn't believe that it's his body. Okay, you cannot see it, but I can see Fidel Castro was the leader of Cuban Revolution. I will probably come back to it. Ernesto Che Guevara was his co-warrior, comrade znamená soudruh, if you forgot about this. He was from Argentina and became legendary hero of this communist deliberation movement. Still, especially when he stood against Fidel Castro, when Fidel Castro asked for help from Soviet Union, for which Ernesto Che Guevara, as a real communist, refused because he said that Soviets are just imperialists, they are not real communists. So you see that even socialism was deriving and developing in many branches like a tree. Taliban was Islamistic fundamentalistic movement in the times of Afghanistan, and that was actually the reason why Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan, because in 1960s and 70s Afghanistan was a kingdom that was kind of like Western oriented and neutral, and in 1970s in elections kind of leftist government was winning. They were not communists, but they proclaimed that they should start with collectivization or ban of Islam, which was very important because in countryside and mountains of Hindu Kush, people were very conservative. And that's why this Taliban movement start together and have that opinion that probably Christians and white men are trying to destroy Islam. Look at Israel. Every time Europe and USA are helping Israel, and Arabs are defeated, are being banished from their homes. These communists are trying to ban Islam, like in Soviet Union. So let's fight, let's save it. So they created this radical Islamistic way called Wahhabism that found their support in Saudi Arabia, that became very rich thanks to oil, and Taliban was financed. What is paradox? That Taliban pulled down this government, Soviet Union invaded Afghanistan to defeat Taliban, and Taliban was supported by USA. Among them there was Osama bin Laden, Saudi Arab millionaire who came to fight and organize voluntary troops of Muslims fighting Soviet Union with American weapons. He even made his flying license in America. And once Soviets were defeated, so Taliban overruled Afghanistan again, and they tried to prepare their attacks against USA because still USA was the dominant power in the world. They want to attack it, and they prepare it with the most effective and most infamous infamous terrorist attack in history with the hitting the tower skyscrapers in New York on 11 September 2001. So fall of the twins. And Taliban is still there and Americans cannot defeat it. Solidarność, I told you about this labor union, and Lech Walesa too, you will see the pictures. Ronald Reagan was Republican president, former actor, playing in cowboy, racist movies, race against Indians, Native Americans, who became pretty like radical American president who refused to support uh, business with Soviet Union because during all the period of the Cold War, U.S. companies, American companies, uh, taking like this free market, were selling grain, wheat to Soviet Union. There could be space race, arms race, armament race, but still American companies were selling food and crops to Soviet Union. Soviet Union could then use their labor for production of tanks and missiles. Ronald Reagan said stop, and this embargo, economic embargo blockade, caused that Soviet Union had moved now a lot of their production to agriculture, and they missed it with tanks. They moved it to Czechoslovakia. It was not enough because nobody worked in the paper factories. That's why we didn't have toilet paper and these period pads for ladies. So this was interesting. Like sometimes strict precautions can be more effective, which they didn't survive. That's why a lot of dissidents appeared. Even today, there can be dissidents in Hong Kong, for example. At the time, dissidents were any critics of regime, especially communist regime. They were being oppressed. They didn't have chance, or they refused to emigrate, and they were being persecuted in this country with prison, with ban of work, what they do, and they became like kind of martyrs in the fight against socialism. In Czechoslovakia, it was famous Václav Havel. In Soviet Union, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, Andrei Sakharov, physician, and so on. So these dissidents are really important for the fall. Yeah, Alexander Solzhenitsyn, he spent years in Gulag and he wrote famous book Archipelago, Gulag, in which he described his experience, memories from Stalinist Gulag. He was awarded Nobel Prize for Literature, and Soviets allowed him to go away and stay there. We are not going to allow you come back. And he refused to go to Sweden and take Nobel Prize because said, no, I will stay here as memento. As a memento that I'm being oppressed. I cannot publish, and in the world I'm celebrated. The same with Václav Havel, who was a famous playwright of the absurd drama. Not very understandable, logical for me, but he became very important personality for many hippies and big beat players and so on. And he's organized actually politicians and lawyers in 1977 in the Charter 77 that was petition uh, against Czechoslovak communist regime in order to protest against unlawful imprisonment of members of rock band Plastic People of the Universe, and he was the spokesman of this Charter 77. And of course all of them, including Václav Havel, were in prison, which was obvious that communist Czechoslovakia, socialist Czechoslovakia, is just breaking their oath from Helsinki Peace Conference and persuaded that moral, ethical right to rule is not there anymore. Okay, before we move on, yeah, check the time. 18 minutes, perfect. I think I can manage large portion of this topic. Also, in lesson to analyze these pictures is the point of view that can be seen even today, guys. Just replace USSR with Russia and NATO, different countries, so they look like small teddy bear being besieged by all enemies around with Uncle Sam, or small Uncle Sam sees that how terrible bear is like spreading to another country. So that was really like bipolar world in this way. Couple of pictures in here that I picked up. Maybe I should really add some more of them. Stalin and Mao Zedong in one picture, poster, America and the communists and scaring people. What would happen? Maybe that would happen. Hard to say. It's very famous, really famous cartoon of the Cuban Crisis between John Fitzgerald Kennedy and Nikita Khrushchev arm wrestling instead of pushing the button to launch hydrogenium bombs of Cuban Crisis. These numbers of Europe are numbers of American or Soviet army deployed in other countries. So just like more than 1.5 million soldiers in East Germany, Poland, Czechoslovakia, in these countries, 500,000 in here. Compared to American armies, even Elvis Presley was serving his military service 1 year or 2 years in Germany in one Air Force basement, but I don't know whether it was Ramstein or the others. Yeah, then the Ramstein is called according to American military basement in Germany. But as you see in many countries, so really both blocks were prepared for the war. Anyway, Soviets pretend themselves that they are bringing feminism, equality, racial justice, and so on. Many people believe that, and I can tell you that it depends from person to person. My father, as a communist, he was really okay with this, the social justice, but I know that many people around them know. And when just these things change, so their attitude toward Roma people in Czechoslovakia was very different. So it changed, but this was one of some like small positive features that at least it was promoted that black people are not like evil and contradictory to USA when in 1960s Martin Luther King had to give famous speeches and he was killed, assassinated. The same with Asians, and when you see things happening in USA even today, still it is very difficult. Of course, it is very easy to promote like racial justice when there are no any black people living in Soviet Union or anywhere. But this is like Jaromír Nohavica was singing this song about like Afričan čata v Africe and so on, and one of them being born to Ancha in our village. Okay, that was some other pictures in here from 1980s already. Lech Walesa talking famous mustache and talking to Karol Wojtyla, John Paul II, a symbol for me of the Solidarność and Polish resistance. Taliban fires with Stingers and M15s, but most of M14, sorry, but most of them wearing Kalashnikov guns. If you also mistaken with Czechoslovak version, Soundpulsor 58, it's different, completely different technology. They look similar, but they are really different. Since Mikhail Gorbachev starting to control Soviet Union, he really accepted kind of peace process according to Helsinki proposals. Together with Ronald Reagan, actually ended up with a strict regime. So Mikhail, so they were actually happy that Soviets changed their mind, and suddenly Russians started to be taken as guys that are actually reasonable to talk to, and that's why they signed up a couple of treaties in Reykjavik and in Iceland and in Malta about disarmament. So disarmament treaties were that they would decrease the number of their nuclear missiles, which they promised to have about only 1,000. But before that, they had 50,000 of these missiles. So it was really big step for that. In the middle of 1980s, even Chernobyl nuclear power plant had this big crash. You all know this famous series that is kind of like true. And it really changed also the attitude of many other people and really like why are you like doing this scaring with nuclear weapons when you have these nuclear dangers destroying our environment all the time? That was also things when the forests around Žiar nad Hronom, around Handlova and Prievidza were being just poisoned. I can remember these forests looked like in that they were like trees covered with this mold, this green mold. I thought it's like natural, but only like last decades I can see that now we have free trees and healthy forests, and we are cutting them down. Deforestation. So it's also things that move people to something else that like stupid arguments about politics and so on. Still, people had to work, must need some hope and dream about having more money and some fortune, but that's all. But you have to keep also human and civic rights. That's why also in Germany unification, their symbol, the Berlin Wall, was being uh, destroyed, no, damaged by graffitis and freedom calls, and finally destroyed with some bulldozers and so on. Today, you have this big square in Berlin with no wall at all. But there are walls elsewhere in the world. For the seminar, there are some timelines, but if you're interested in this topic, guys, so you can just open them or just Google them. But those of few of you, I expect not many of you to attend my history seminar next school year. But if you do, we will watch them. Okay, decolonization process. I will check it out if I have time. Yeah, 12 minutes. So I'm really doing a great job today. At least we'll start with this because it's similar with this Cold War, ending the Cold War. Actually, my opinion is that since this 2004, 2005, there is another Cold War with the changes, couple of revolutions, coup d'etats in Ukraine, and with the beginning what I call, well, still we call information war. And I could see it over the internet, and especially since 2009, when creation of Facebook gave Russian propaganda great weapon. And of course, West, with all the free information, without any censorship or checking the facts, this fact check was spreading to crazy anti-vax movement or rise of nationalism and conspirational theories about chemtrails and Rothschilds, and actually restoring of 19th century hoaxes about mm, vaccination and about Jews ruling the world and New World Order from 18th century. It was really crazy, and Russians use it for propaganda, for their glorification of their history, and actually making instability in any countries of European Union and NATO. Anyway, uh, Cold War and even this process brings one part to emancipation, and that is emancipation of countries that used to be less developed in economy, in education, didn't experience this enlightenment period, scientific revolution, and industrial revolution especially, and didn't want to be part of capitalistic versus communist world struggle. So that allowed many countries after the Second World War to seize independence from their former colonial masters from the beginning of 20th century. That was part especially of these big colonial empires like United Kingdom, France, and others who started to lose their colonies. It was easy because they gained more colonies from Germany, for example, like Tanzania was given to Britain after the First World War. But after the Second World War, these countries were being destroyed. They needed to be rebuilt again thanks to the Marshall Plan. And imagine that French, now living in poverty, having demonstrations of their own people, had to send their soldiers to Vietnam. The Dutch had to send their soldiers to Indonesia. Okay, British army to all the countries. So even for them, it was really probably useful to give independence to many countries. Sometimes they just let them be, and with the borders they had, it's like Portuguese did, or sometimes French did. And what was the result? They started to fight each other. Religious, racial, ethnical conflicts, tribal conflicts sometimes. Sometimes dictators overrule these countries. So the other countries try to keep them, like France in Algeria, USA in Vietnam. Sometimes French persuaded, let's say, Mali, Chad, or Mauritania, at least to have their own military basements with the foreign legions there. British, for example, with Israel or India, they promised them, gave them independence only if those countries built up democratic system of elections and three check like pyramid of checks and controls of power of judicial, legislative, and executive power. Only when they did it in India, they gave them independence, and that's why India today is the biggest democracy in the world. Is the biggest, the most populated democratic country of the world. Israel, despite being like really military and sometimes aggressive, uh, persuaded sometimes about their greatness, but still Israel is still democratic state. And they can change. Benjamin Netanyahu, just like for past many years, he is probably not able to create another new government. I don't know how it is actually evolving right now. Still, the thing is that when two superpowers, USA, USSR, creating these two worlds of socialism and capitalism, and Truman Doctrine versus the Brezhnev Doctrine. Brezhnev Doctrine was this invasion to Czechoslovakia. If Americans have right to deploy their armies anywhere in the world to protect their interests, we can deploy our soldiers and our KGB agents and our educational projects and investments into economy anywhere in the world to protect socialist advantages. So in this way, they couldn't fight each other, but they could fight in proxy wars, zástupné vojny. So when Angola is fighting against South Africa, Russians, Soviets can help Angolans. Cuba sent army there. South Africa, despite apartheid racist regime, But then for Americans, it was country that was only loyal to America in this part of Africa. And really, South African forces defeated Angolese and Zimbabwe and many other countries, Mozambique. And there were many wars between them. So in this way, some other countries were given independence. Some of them had to fight. Some of them were given it for free. And some of the big countries start to rise even today, like India, definitely Brazil, which was stopped by this epidemic of coronavirus. Indonesia, definitely the biggest Muslim country in the world, was ruled by the Dutch. You know, I asked Mr. Haas to come to the seminar, tell us something. He refused. He said for the Dutch, it is something like Vietnam for Americans. Tragedy, trauma, depression, something you are not really proud of it. So they start to organize in this non-aligned movement, and they start to be called the countries of the third world, not developed world, but the world that is trying to find their freedom in terms of nation, religion, in their economy, and so on. Okay, we start with a couple of countries because we, of course, cannot move on, and I got only 6 minutes, so I try at least to pass China very quickly because it's a big topic. Chinese history, it's really dramatic. Last time we mentioned it, I believe it was in Opium Wars of 19th century, these colonial wars. There was another big Boxer uprising against Christianization. In China, as empire was actually very easy to manipulate because they didn't have any industry and they had to tolerate kind of like trade stations and some towns being just taken over by colonial powers. From those, there remains a couple of treaties in which Macau was part of Portugal and given back to China. Hong Kong was rent by United Kingdom for 100 years, and they promised to give it back to China, but in promise to keep like two government regime. But China is slowly working upon like destruction of this democratic regime in Hong Kong. Still, they were not happy because they saw that China is being exploited. And already, when the last emperor died and empress widow died, there was only small baby emperor left. So Chinese generals of Chinese Imperial Army decided to start coup d'état, and Sun Yat-sen, general of Chinese Army, proclaimed Chinese Republic. That was in 1912. Since now about this baby emperor, I recommend you to watch movie The Last Emperor by Bernardo Bertolucci, one of the best movies in movie history, and it's the story of this guy, of this last emperor, and it's actually all like history of China in the 20th century, but actually 1980s, so not these modern ones, but it's different. What happened with this republic? Sun Yat-sen later established one of the political parties for this republic that was called Kuomintang, and its new leader Chiang Kai-shek had to clash with new danger that popped up after the First World War, where China was fighting on the side of the Entente powers together with Japan. But from communist Russia, communism started to be spread in here, and that was led by this guy. For communist China, great hero, but for others, one of the most infamous, the grandest dictators of the world history, with probably more victims than Adolf Hitler had or Stalin. Mao Zedong or Mao Zedong established Communist Party of China and started civil war already in 1920s. In 1930s, there was legendary long march of communists who had to escape from one province of China for 4,000 kilometers from hills and fighting all the time against Kuomintang, the nationalistic party, to a province when they had support. Then Japanese invaded Manchuria, North China, occupied half China, killed millions of people. So for a while, communists and nationalists put together and fought together with Americans and Soviets. Then they banished Japanese from China, and the civil war continue again. So now Kuomintang didn't have such a great support as communists had from Soviet Union, and in 1949, as I told you, there was final eventual victory of Communist Party. So now we have People's Republic of China. Chairman Mao actually. That was his only title, chairman of Communist Party. He was given like dictator all the things, and Soviet Union believed they have good friends, but Mao turned out to be one of the craziest, the maddest rulers in the world history, and changing his opinions according to his mood and weather in China. That is really crazy. And there were many things and ups and downs in the history how Chinese want to actually still were fighting with this colonial heritage and kind of industrialization or looking for some at least enlightened regime that despite communists were evil, but they were enlightened in terms of education, promoting Janos Komensky and so on. Not in here, in China. In China, the only book that was allowed was so-called the Red Book. That was just a book of the quotes of Chairman Mao, which was combination of Lenin and Confucius and Lao Tzu quotes, and that was all. People couldn't read anything else. Then they realized there are just like having terrible problems in economy, so they proclaimed that they had to pass great leap forward, velký skok vpred. It meant that since they don't have industry, all agriculture must change into the industry. When we don't have mines, we need we don't have factories, steelworks. We have to build forges with furnaces in villages, just like it was in Iron Age, and gather all the metals we have and try it out in the villages. Of course, people not working in the fields and gathering rice, they were trying to melt their cutlery in Iron Age period furnaces, which caused hunger and millions of that because of famine. Of course, who was accused? Bourgeoisie. Anybody wearing glasses was bad, was evil, teachers, and so on. And even in like Cambodia, for example, Khmer Rouge movements used the same thing. They killed 2 million people wearing glasses only for this reason. Then, of course, Soviets start to criticize them. So Mao found another way. He said, Soviets, look at them. They are bourgeoisie communists. So actually, the only real conflict of nuclear war was not between America and USA. It was between Chinese People's Republic, and Soviet Union. And actually, near Mongolian borders, they were actually shooting at each other, and it was really high danger and craziness of Khrushchev and Brezhnev and Mao Zedong that there could be actually nuclear war. This, Soviet suit was actually used by Richard Nixon, who actually visited China, and they started with great things. So suddenly Mao also changed this, but Americans proved to be not great friends because of Vietnam. So he started with another great proletarian cultural revolution, and it was destroying of bourgeoisie. And that was just diminishing any foreigners, any middle class in China. Because after the death of Mao, China was in terrible state. Nobody, of course, could say aloud, like Khrushchev said about Stalin, that he was evil. Nobody said it. Still, all Yuans, there are portraits everywhere in China. But new leaders, chairmen of Communist Party, with Zhou Enlai, Tang Xiaoping, and the president of China, understood that they had to start with reforms even before Mikhail Gorbachev started it. Again, motivation, the inspiration was found in Czechoslovakia of the Prague Spring of 1968. They started reforms with economy like NEP reforms, open market. One thing they didn't do, and thanks to the regime survived, was they didn't ban censorship. They just open market. They gave chance to communists to get rich, like extremely rich. And this is why China is gathering all the resources and producing, because they had very cheap labor and building their industry, investing in huge towns on the coast that are beautiful, but still China is billions of people is slowly getting on their way. When 1989 Tiananmen protesting square, the guy with these plastic bags tried to stop the tanks. We don't know how he ended. He climbed on the tank, but then we don't have any footage of the movie, but this student protest in Tiananmen, the square of heavenly peace, where both stopped, and China is still communist and still open market economy and production for this. Still, it is imperialistic country concerning their territories of Taiwan, which was the only island that remained under the control of Kuomintang, and that's why there is still Republic of China. In 1912, still today in Taiwan, protected by American Navy. Macau in as a Portugal town, Hong Kong, Tibet that was being invaded in 1949, and in order to pull down theocracy of Dalai Lama, who escaped to India, and since that time they're living in exile, probably will never come back home. with Kashmir territory between Pakistan, India, and China, that even they want to fight for mountain passes that are 6,000 meters. They cannot shoot at each other because these machine guns are not working. So soldiers are fighting each other with cups. And actually, a couple of months ago, there was another clash between Pakistani or Indian and Chinese soldiers. Of course, the involvement in Korea, that was direct one, and Vietnam indirect, is another story. And I think that I'm many minutes after, after the end of the lesson. So sorry for this, guys. Run for the other lesson and have a nice day or weekend. Bye bye.